One would have thought by now that we would have a much better grip on the spread of the COVID-19 virus in this country than we do. Unfortunately, we don't. Here are the numbers for today. We have confirmed 3.17 million cases, up by 57,437 from yesterday. Fortunately, 951,000 people have recovered, and unfortunately, 135,000 people have died. That's up by 874 from yesterday. Now, I just read these very disturbing numbers, and I said yesterday with Dr. Margaret Flowers that this really seems to be like Groundhog Day. I had not planned to open this segment with this question for my first guest, but he's traveled the world and understands different government structures and cultures. So with that, I want to get his assessment on where he sees the U.S. being and how the U.S. has gotten where we are. He's a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. He is Caleb Maupin. As always, Caleb, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here, as always.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this because, in my opinion, the United States has messed up and is messing up a lot of things geopolitically. Venezuela, Bolivia, Yemen, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. I mean, pick a spot on, throw a dart at the map. But a domestic problem like this, we're supposed to kill this instead of it killing us. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that the United States, more than any other country, has really doubled down on the philosophy of individualism. Now, the idea that you're on your own. And, we have Henry David Thoreau, who says the government is best that governs least. We have the free market ideology that is very widespread, and this idea that the maximization of competition, the laissez-faire, and littlest amount of government involvement, results in the best possible economic outcome. And that as a country, we have really doubled down on this belief that you're on your own. And when you have a situation like the pandemic, it's very, very hard to deal with it adequately with that belief. If everyone's on their own, if your problems are your problems, they're not a matter of public safety, they're not a matter of society's problems. If your personal health, your personal safety, your personal income is all your problem, what do you do in a situation like this where it's necessary for public health to shut down big parts of the economy, where that results in all kinds of people losing jobs, where people having access to health care and getting health care is really, really necessary to stop the spread of a disease? What do you do in a situation that really mandates collective action? Right? You can't respond to a pandemic like this with individualism. It requires collective action. It requires working together. And that seems to be where our society has really, hit a wall. And I think that that's the basis of a lot of our problems. And that many of the countries around the world that have effectively dealt with this pandemic have done so better because they have more of a collectivist identity.
To add some other concepts, rugged individualism, the Protestant work ethic, those have been, along with the things that you mentioned, those have all been concepts and ideas that have been put forth and to a great degree have controlled the American approach, not only domestically, but then we get to things such as American individualism and all that kind of stuff. But there seems to have been a shift, and you might have a better idea or be able to put your finger on when this shift took place. I don't know if it started with Ronald Reagan. I don't know, because again, I'm and I may be naive here and stupid. And if I am, I'm just utterly shocked at this is not the America in response to COVID-19. This is not the America that I grew up understanding was supposed to be.
Well, it's interesting because when I was growing up in school, I went to school in Ohio in a small town. They always told us that capitalism and radical individualism, rugged individualism is the American way. And this is because of the pioneers, right? This is because of the pioneers who came to the new land and went out on their own and had their little homestead and all of that. there's probably a grain of truth in that, but it's really kind of ignoring the fact that a lot of the pioneers were utopian socialists, right? I mean, if you look at the United States, the early United States, it's all over the United States. You had utopian religious communities like Zoar in Ohio, the early Mormon church, for example. They had what they called the United Order, where they shared everything in common, and that even the man who invented the word socialism in the English language, Robert Owen, he took it from French, but he was the first person to use the word socialism in English, and he set up a whole socialist city in Indiana called New Harmony. And he was actually invited before the U.S. Congress to give a speech about why socialism was better than capitalism. It really, collectivism is not foreign to America and the country. I mean, there was certainly plenty of racism and colonialism and slaughtering of Native Americans and slavery. But this idea that every individual is on their own no group identity is not really something that shows up and gains dominance, I would say, in U.S. history until the dawn of the Cold War. And I think it was because the United States was at the center of the fight against communism that it really became ideologically devoted to free market capitalism. And Ayn Rand, the philosopher, who wasn't born in the United States, she was born in Russia.
In Russia,
Russian exile. Yeah, but she wrote a book called Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal. And we started hearing about capitalism wasn't just better than socialism or communism. Capitalism was this amazing ideal system. And, she wrote another book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And, in American schools, in the name of anti-communism, we started getting this indoctrination that capitalism was the only way, that radical, extreme, libertarian capitalism, mind you, was the only true and effective form of capitalism, and that really these ideas really, really took hold. You can talk about the 1970s when essentially the neoliberal Chicago School of Economics started to have dominance, and the Reagan administration really employed a lot of those folks and put a lot of their policies into practice. You can also talk about the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s when the United States declared a, quote, new world order. And on the basis of that new world order, we were told that there was no alternative to capitalism. Francis Fukuyama called it the end of history. And we have really just doubled down on this belief that individualism becomes above all else. And I think that is really driving our failure to address a collective society-wide and human race-wide problem.
Okay. Well, see, that's why I asked you the question. Now, next issue. ICE is telling foreign students to leave the country if their schools are going online only. And this is according to reporting by Mother Jones. The Trump administration is giving a very draconian choice to foreign students at schools that plan to offer only online courses this fall. Quickly transfer to a school with in-person classes or leave the country. In this time of uncertainty and incredible turmoil, I'm once again befuddled. Why do this to students? Your thoughts?
Well, the thing is that Trump is trying to put pressure on the university system. That's what's going on here. That basically the university system of the United States is politically liberal and is more inclined to keep shut down. Seems like right now Republicans are very anxious to open things up as quickly as possible. Democrats are the ones saying, let's slow things down and be extra, extra careful. And so Donald Trump would like the American university system and the American educational system overall to be more in line with what he wants, which is rapid reopening. So threatening to take the foreign students away from universities if they don't have in-person classes is a way to put a huge amount of pressure on the American university system. But it's also Donald Trump playing some ideological games as well. Steve Bannon, who's the economic nationalist who was very influential on the Trump presidential campaign in 2016, would often bring up the presence of foreign students at universities in the United States and talk about how it seemed like the American educational system was serving an international purpose rather than a domestic one. He would complain about Virginia Tech and the number of Chinese students. And it seemed like this economic nationalist element has long had a critique of the university system and the fact that it plays an international role. What's interesting, though, is that Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the main strategist of the United States in the Cold War, actually said that Harvard and Yale and MIT and universities like that were very key to the United States in winning the Cold War, that it was kind of a soft power strategy, that the smartest people from Africa and Asia and Latin America and Europe. They come to the United States. They go to Harvard. They go to MIT. They get a really good education. They love American culture. They learn American ideals, and they go back to their homeland. They're a lot more likely to be sympathetic with the United States in geopolitical confrontations. So, it seems like the intelligence apparatus has long felt like having Harvard and Yale and MIT and Virginia Tech and schools like that and the University
American
of California
University
system. Yeah, that having those things is necessary for the soft power strength of the United States internationally. Whereas it seems that Trump, that's more in with the military-industrial complex, it's more about peace through strength rather than soft power. They don't see that value. And they don't buy that argument. And this has been a disagreement among the powers that be. And I think Trump is using this pandemic to amplify the voice of one side, that being the Steve Bannon and Pentagon side.
Explain to my audience why you believe pressuring universities by attacking foreign students is a pressure on American universities.
Well, basically, these universities are being told that if you have students who are there on a student visa and you don't have classes, if you have online classes, not in-person classes, they have to leave if they want to keep their student visa. They have to go to another university.
But what is it about the foreign? My question is, what is it? Explain to the audience. For example, there's an incredible financial impact here based upon the higher amount of money that foreign students pay to attend these American universities.
Indeed, yes.
So that's one example of the type of direct financial pressure that a policy like this puts on universities. That's what I was trying to get to, a little more specific on how attacking foreign students is a pressure point for American universities.
Yes, and I'll also add that the university system has been a target of the neoconservative right for a couple decades now. David Horowitz, who is a conservative activist, kind of launched a campaign against American universities during the Bush administration, arguing that they were too liberal and that
Dick
professors
Cheney's
are
wife.
too liberal.
What's her name?
Yeah, Lynn Cheney.
Lynn
yes.
Cheney.
And
I get her and Liz right. Lynn Cheney was part of that big move.
Right, and they started publishing lists of professors that they deemed to be un-American and unpatriotic and pro-terrorism.
Having them deported.
Yeah.
Having foreign professors deported.
Indeed. Furthermore, let's also add that the Justice Department has increasingly been sounding the alarm against Chinese students. And the FBI and the Department of Justice have been playing up the idea that Chinese students who study in the United States are spies, they're working for the Chinese military, they should be treated with suspicion. And that's been going on as well. And that's essentially a way to punish China. That's like a threat that China won't be able to send people here to study. That's part of the whole, the trade war with China is the threat and the pressure placed on Chinese students in particular. So there's many factors at play here, but I see this as politics. I don't see this as Trump being concerned about the educational future of the country.
Harvard and MIT have Wednesday filed a lawsuit seeking to prevent the president from stripping foreign students of their visas. And we'll have to see, particularly with the number of attorneys in the federal system that went to Harvard, we're going to have to see how many or how successful this lawsuit is.
Indeed. Yes, we'll have to see.
On the 7th of July, Harper's Magazine published an open letter on justice and open debate signed by Noam Chomsky, J.K. Rowling, Margaret Atwood, about 150 signatories. It's an open letter supposedly condemning cancel culture and public shaming, stating that, quote, the free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of a liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted, end quote. Caleb, your thoughts on the letter and the furor that is now circulating around this letter?
Well, what's interesting about it is if you read the text of the letter, the part that's not being quoted a lot is there's a reference to the rise of, quote, illiberalism around the world, and arguing that there are governments around the world that are more authoritarian, that are rising, and the article kind of condemns that. But then it says that in order to combat these governments, it's necessary to have a free flow of information and discourse in the Western countries. And based on that, they talked about how increasingly, editors of magazines are being dismissed. Writers are losing their jobs, and there is this atmosphere that's been created where if you publish a controversial opinion, particularly an opinion deemed to be racist or sexist or transphobic or homophobic or something like that, not only does the article get pulled and not published, but the editor of the magazine gets fired. And that there's this tendency for people talk about Twitter mobs, basically stifling debate and discourse in the United States. And, J.K. Rowling, who signed it, she's been critical of transgenderism, and she's voiced some of the feminist critiques of transgenderism. And she's done so in somewhat of a more mild way. But she's been very, very widely condemned for that on the internet. There's been calls to pull her writings and to block her. And we're seeing, kind of a response to this kind of internet culture, this internet cancel culture, where kind of an internet campaign can be launched and views can be silenced, by social media activism. And I think that this points to an increasing divide because, as the article states, that is the argument, is that the United States is supposedly more free than all these countries around the world, but yet we are increasingly having a situation where certain views are just not tolerated, and there are harsh penalties if you speak them. And it's a contradiction that I think is almost kind of defining Western discourse in our time. We're becoming more restrictive in what we're allowed to say, while we condemn countries that are also restrictive.
I found the letter, first of all, to be incredibly vague. To me, if it had been more of an introduction to a philosophy paper that one would be writing in graduate school, it would make more sense to me. Again, I found it to be incredibly vague. They made a number of references to things, but never specifically stated exactly what it is that they're speaking to. I mean, giving clear examples of what they're speaking to. I also found it interesting. The letter seems to me to be doing the very thing that it's complaining about. For example, you have Emily Vanderwoof, who signed the letter, and her colleague Matthew Iglesias signed the letter. But Vanderwerf, who is transgender, says now she's mad she signed the letter because Matthew Iglesias signed the letter and he's written some anti-transgender stuff. So it seems to me that that position is inconsistent with the position of the letter. And there are other examples of that. I found it to be incredibly vague and contradictory to its own premise.
Well, indeed, and they didn't list any specific examples, because if they did that, then they would immediately be saying that something that somebody did that they got in trouble for was okay. It would be commenting on a specific case, and I doubt that all the signatories would have agreed on cases like that. And that I really doubt that these people wanted to actually, endorse some of the actions that people have suffered for, and that's what the article would come across as doing if they listed specific cases. And it was just kind of this vague call for more academic freedom, more editorial freedom. But yeah, I mean, it seems that beneath the surface, there are some increasing frustrations, I would say, among the cultural community in the United States. But it was very, very carefully expressed in this Harper's letter. And it makes you wonder what kind of conversations are happening in editorial rooms and behind closed doors, because I think there's a lot more discontent than we realize.
I think it would have been a better letter had the letter called attention to how mainstream corporate media is being used to promote narratives that are serving the military-industrial complex, as well as the other unsavory elements within the United States, such as the ridiculous story about Russia allegedly paying Taliban bounties for the heads of U.S. soldiers, the Mueller report, Russia hacking into the U.S., into the DNC server. I don't hear any of that in terms of how mainstream media is being used as a propaganda tool. That, to me, would have been a lot more powerful than this incredibly vague discussion about the cancel culture.
Indeed, but I don't think that many of the signatories would have agreed with that. Maybe Noam Chomsky would have, but I think many of the signatories don't have disagreement with foreign policy issues of the United States. I think they agree with the campaign against Russia and China, and they agree with U.S. military interventions for the most part. They just don't they simply don't like some of the pressure that's being placed on people in editorial and academic positions, and I think that such a letter, maybe Noam Chomsky would have signed a letter like that, but a lot of the folks that signed this wouldn't have signed that because they're on board with empire and war.
I'm surprised that Fareed Zakaria, based upon the image that people have of him, I'm surprised that he was a signatory to this.
Indeed. And again, it really points to the question of what kind of conversations are happening in the back room and what kind of unrest is taking place. And I really do think that one of the issues is that now the United States in its foreign policy no longer presents itself in a conservative way, but in a liberal way. During the Cold War, the United States was invading countries because the godless communists who don't believe in Christianity and they're going to come in and tear it up. So the United States was kind of waging war on this anti-communist conservative basis. Now the United States goes into countries to defend human rights, to protect women, to protect the LGBT community, to stop
and steal
racist
oil.
Yeah, well, indeed. And so because the foreign policy narrative of the United States is shifting, where interventions are conducted with liberal talking points rather than conservative ones, I think that's causing the discourse of U.S. media to shift. And I think that's causing some confusion.
As always, Caleb Maupin, fabulous analysis. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Enjoy the weekend and look forward to having you back.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, man. Folks, you're listening to The Critical Hour here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Dr. Wilmer Leon. There is more on the other side. Stay tuned.